K2 is the second largest and deadliest mountain on Earth. It is known for its dangerous terrain, steep slopes, and harsh weather. This mountain is much more dangerous than Everest, which is now in Pakistan. K2 is 28,251 feet above sea level and is right next to China. Size-wise, it was almost the same as its older sibling. Many people have reached the top of Mount Everest. Few climbers are willing to try to climb K2, which has bad weather and can cause brain swelling. There are still the frozen bodies of 80 climbers on the peak, where they died on their way to the top. Compared to the thousands who climb the mountain yearly, only 306 people have reached the top. K2 on Everest is, without a doubt, something to be afraid of. A year after the first successful climb of Mount Everest, an Italian group led by Ardito Desso and called the Car Corpsman Expedition set out to reach the top of the world's hardest mountain. In July 1952, K2 was first climbed. The two climbers who reached the top, Leno Lasso and Aki Kagan, will be remembered as the men who climbed K2, but the mission will soon be a hotly debated subject. Two other climbers on the trip had told the two climbers to set up camp at a lower altitude, but the climbers did not listen and set up camp at a higher altitude. In the 1950s, people tried to disprove the controversial idea that Mehdi and Bonnet were left above 8,000 meters without shelter or oxygen on purpose. This was done to keep the heroes of Italy's history from losing their respect. Even now, the two Italians who were the first to reach the top of K2 are still looked down upon. Still, the Italian people see them as national treasures. The next successful attempt wouldn't come until 1977, when Chira Yoshizawa led a group of Japanese people there. Since then, more people have learned about the dangers, and rich tourists no longer go to this mountain in the same numbers as they do Everest, because their lives are at risk. This was especially true on August 1st, 2008, when 11 mountaineers died in a series of accidents. This day will be remembered as the day 11 mountaineers died. There was no need for rope support below the top because the ropes were put in place much too early. The most dangerous part of the mountain is the bottleneck, which is also the highest point at 8,000 meters. Climbers have to use a lot of strength and focus on getting to the top of this area, which is very rocky. Walls of ice that were 100 meters high and could fall at any time. Many climbers have a lot of respect for Iraqis because they are the ones who get things done and set the bar for the experience. Nothing is smoothed out. It has glaciers and black mountains. It makes you feel reverent. Just above the bottleneck where the climbers were, they ran out of rope. They have been waiting for hours for lower ropes to be cut and put above them so they can keep going. This is a very dangerous situation that led to this. 8 a.m. As the climbers moved up the slope, Mandik of the Serbian team tried to pass Seely Skog of the Norwegian team. Mandik then tried to cross while he was still attached to the rope. As he got close to Ok, he said, he fell and began to slide down the side of the mountain. Mandy fell about 100 feet down the bottleneck. The hiker died from her injuries and was later found without a heartbeat. How would they get the body back down the mountain at this point? Due to the high altitude and rough terrain, a small group of people decided to tie a rope to the body and slowly lower it to the camp below. This is a very hard job to do. Shaheen Beige, a Pakistani, was one of the people who helped bring them down. Beige fell down, ran into Frederick's string suite, slowed down on the slope, and disappeared over the edge. GM Beg from Pakistan started to act very strangely out of the blue. He is going down on my right side while holding on to the rope around my lower thighs. As he does this, we yell, "Let go of the rope!" He then fell and didn't try to stop himself at all. Instead of just letting go, he Christs and then disappears, rocketing into the air. high altitude, cerebral edema, and high altitude sickness, which causes eyes to bleed and sends fluid to the brain, are all thought to have killed him. At an altitude of 8,000 meters, the death zone makes it hard to make good decisions. This is by far the most dangerous killer on the mountain. Climbers who are too tired to keep going will sit down, and it will be very hard for them to keep going in this state. After taking a long time to get together and talk about what to do, they might never get up. The group decides to keep going toward the top. On that day, 18 people climbed the second highest mountain in the world, but only a few would live to tell the story. The climbers started going down the mountain at 8:30 p.m. Now, there is no light at all on the bottleneck peak. As the teams tried to get down to Camp 4, the rocks above the terrain fell and covered Norwegian mountaineer Wall Bay. 3 climbers were making their way down the bottleneck at the same time. The last thing I saw was Roll's head torch movie. Then I couldn't see anything. The bottom neck's ropes were completely carried away, so everything is fine. Without fixed ropes, climbing down through the bottleneck is a death sentence for all but the most experienced climbers. To get back to the group above the bottleneck, the climbers who were still alive would have to use ice axes and clam bonds to free solo down the mountain at its sharpest point. They didn't know what had happened and couldn't find the ropes tied down in the dark. They decided to wait until the next morning to look for the ropes. Many climbers from the Korean Irish and Nora died again on their way down the bottleneck Italian semi-solos. Hugh's Airy had run out of oxygen, so Marco went past him and kept going down the mountain with his ice axe. Ultimately, Hughes would fall to his death, and Marco would see it. Marco remembered seeing headlights go down the hill and hearing rumbles. In this situation, you must keep moving forward, or the mountain will kill you next. While they were waiting above the bottleneck, a few of the remaining climbers decided to try to go down, even though they were getting sick from the high altitude and didn't have enough oxygen tanks. The rest of the people were left to sit and watch as their bodies froze to death. They didn't want to fall asleep because they knew they would never wake up, so they sang and banged their fists. From base camp, people tried to save the climbers still stuck in the bottleneck area, but they didn't know that many of the climbers had already died. Soon after, an attempt was made to save 3 Korean team members above the bottleneck. After AAC fall completely beat them, they were barely hanging on to life. Even though they were sick and hurt, the few people who survived the K2 accident could free solo back to the camp forest until rescuers arrived. Several of the 11,000 people who made it out alive had to be taken from lower camps into local hospitals because they had frostbite. There was a lot of confusion about what had really happened. People fought about what causes disasters because everyone had a different story from different places. 2011 would be too far away for the next K2 summit. Many of the people who lived through it later wrote books about it. This is one of the most amazing stories of mountain climbing and death. This short documentary is about the lost souls of K2, and it will always show how much of a force K2 is known to be. Thanks for watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe.